Hello! I haven't done a sim update for a while, and that's somewhat because I had a lot of time I had to take off flying because I had 2 knee surgeries in the last year. And I wanted to try and catch up on stuff, and I'm still working on it. Look, I mean, I've literally stapled a Raspberry Pi to this quad. It's not quite finished yet. But I wanted to give you an update on what was happening, because I'm conscious of the fact that I haven't done anything, and it's not like development has stopped. So I thought I'd give you a quick update of where I am, what I'm going to do, and what I want to be doing in the future. First off, what I had intended to do, and it was in my sort of little list of things to do on my item tracking, is fix the plane dynamics. I wasn't quite happy with the way the plane flew. I had a big look through at some documents about sort of the maths in calculating wing surfaces and the lift and stuff you get. And I sort of started going through that, and I had the plane taxiing okay, because that was a real problem. And it is a real problem with anybody who's messed with wheel colliders in something that has to take off again. It's like the physics fight each other within the game engines. But then what happened is I spent 53 hours or so on a game called Ghost of Tsushima, which is a fantastic game. It's a very large open world sort of feudal Japan adventure where you take on the role of this samurai who's fighting off the Mongol hordes that are attacking, and it's absolutely stunningly beautiful. This stuff I've got here is just taken from the trailer, but you've got these huge, beautiful open worlds, large forests. You go up high on a mountain, you can see for miles, and I thought, I really like that. I want a big open world. And right now, as you know, if you go up high on my sim, you can see the end of the map essentially, and if you fly there, it won't let you go there. This isn't unique to me. If I fly on Velocidrone and I go right to the end, then it'll start telling me that I've reached the end of the map and I should turn around. It still lets me continue, and I can actually loop around and go under the map. If you've ever wondered why you can see through from underneath the map, it's because the way UV mapping works is one direction. So if you put a texture on a mesh from one side, it's invisible from the other side. You'd have to mesh it both sides. And similarly, if I go up in the air in Velocidrone, it will show me the size of the map quite accurately, and you can see, you know, it's reasonably small, and that's fine in most cases. In most cases, especially games focused on racing, you're going around a track, and anybody that's played Liftoff, it's a little bit more harsh in what happens if you try and get out of bounds. If you try and get out of bounds, it will basically reset you, and you can see that what they've done, they've put all their very detailed stuff in the middle of the map, and as you go out, they've made it more sparse, and they haven't got any detail there, but you never get to it because it places you back. And if you try and go up high, it stops you. But when you are up high, you can see certain details being drawn in as you go because of this thing about the level of detail management. That's something that most game engines do in order to make the game more efficient. They have a different level of detail maps. So if you're far away from a tree, basically what you've got is this thing called a 2D billboard, which just looks a bit like a tree from far away. And as you get closer to it, it replaces that 2D billboard with first a less detailed 3D model, and then as you get close to it, a more detailed 3D model. And the idea is it's a kind of seamless journey from one end to the other. The problem is this is mainly built around different types of games. So if you're playing like a driving game or some sort of FPS where you're walking, you will not notice the trees sort of changing as they're coming towards you, because mostly they're covered with other trees. There's sort of, in games you can hide things and put little bits of scenery around to make your level really work. When you go up high in the sim, you can generally see these sort of levels of differences popping in, because it's not really modelled around that. It's very noticeable when you see things sort of popping in differently like that. It kind of takes you away from the sort of experience that I am flying to actually, no, I'm just playing a game. Now, I'm not having a go at either Liftoff or Velocidrome. Both really good sims in their own right. I would say they're a bit bloaty. Both of them take a while to start up and load lots of stuff in. And both of them are also written using Unity Game Engine, which is what I use at the moment. And if you ever wondered how you can tell that, if you just pop into the directory, you'll find something called the Unity Player, which I'll talk about in a second. Part of the problem with the big world and the way the Unity Game Engine works is that if you've got like a terrain with details all over it, it says oh, I need to load all these details into memory and I need to think about displaying them. There's a little bit of intelligence over what's visible. It's not super intelligence. By default, it uses something called frustum culling, which means it will draw anything it thinks is in front of you. Now, it doesn't care if there's a wall in front of you or something, it will just carry on drawing. I've actually used something called occlusion mapping culling, where, especially in the city level, so if you've got a great big city block, then you don't want to draw the stuff behind it, so that's a different thing, but you need to generate occlusion mapping in order to do that. I'm getting too technical. Anyway, what I decided to do to see, could I use some utilities and assets that are out there in order to generate large maps and fly them and see how they feel. So that's what I tried to do. So I quickly integrated some levels into the game, and this is the first of the world builders. This is a utility called TerraWorld, and what you do is you give it some real world GPS coordinates, and I chose Yosemite Valley, which is a very stunning attraction in the US. Loads of people visit there. I visited it before, and what it will do is try and extract all that height map data and then interpret that height map with what it thinks is around there. So if it thinks, bits of green, it's going to think, oh, that's trees, and try and figure out what's rocks and what's whatever. And it's generated a landscape. I don't think it's done a very good job of working out trees and stuff. And this is allegedly supposed to be 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers. It looks more like about a kilometer. And look at the FPS, it's absolutely tanked. Now, it's probably running worse than it actually was, because really 30 frames a second doesn't feel that bad, but the use of screen recording as well as trying to run something quite heavy really does mean everything looks like it's slowed down an awful lot. And it's just too much there. There's all these trees, there's rocks, each piece of land has loads of sort of grass and details in it. It's just so heavy that it's like wiping out memory and processing power, and that's a bit of a shame, because it would be nice to sort of generate a landscape from like a real world area and then be able to use it. And technically I could just use the height map and then fill in my own details without all the stuff in there. But yeah, I was less than impressed on this one. However, what TerraWorld also had is the opportunity to render in completely different way. So I used that same height map and I said, give me low polygon stuff, and this is what we end up with. This is allegedly the same height map, and yeah, it does look similar, but it's drawn it in such a different way that you'd be like, really, is this the same place? It's a bit where the first one was like overdone in terms of like ground details and stuff. This is very sparse in terms of like very basic looking trees, no grass details, which I think really helps. But it's tricky whenever there's like low polygon stuff, because I don't want to just have a landscape with some trees and some hills. I want to put bits in it like bandos and cooling towers and wind turbines, that sort of thing. And I can't integrate normal looking meshes with low polygon stuff. That's the problem. But hey, it's running okay. It's running at a full frame rate. It's locked at 60 frames a second here, so that's okay, but still not right for what I'm thinking. So then I moved over to something called Gaia, which is a procedural level generation tool. So what I said is, generate me a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer valley scene, and I basically could raise the level of where I wanted the water. I asked it to put some grass and some tree details in there, but I'm landing here just to sort of show you how sparse or intense that was, and it's about right. In some ways I wanted quite sort of dense forest to fly through in one part, but sort of more open places in the other where I would put extra things. But the frame rate's absolutely locked here at 60 frames a second, which is the maximum it runs on my regular monitor. And we've got a pretty decent draw distance here, and we're not having too many problems with pop-up. We're using things like a little bit of volumetric fog in order to sort of disguise the draw distance. but you can see it's a reasonably large area. It's still not quite as large as I'm looking for, but the general gist I get from this one is this is quite a usable landscape, and I could quite imagine putting some extra bits in there. You know, all the normal stuff that I've got in the regular levels. What I'm really looking for is having a big world and putting the city in one place and putting some of the stuff that was in the desert in other places, and basically letting you either fly from one place to the other, or, you know, just being able to teleport to places on the map. Instead of having lots of little levels, have a big level with lots of stuff on it. You could even get Gaia to spawn these buildings. They're actually called farms. I don't quite see how it's a farm, and it wouldn't be as useful to me because it's like, well, I'd want one of these buildings, and we've got like several hundred of them sort of scattered throughout, depending how we change the spawn rate in various settings there. But like, not bad, something. And once again, we've got the option of doing the low poly stuff, and again, I can cope with the low poly landscape. You can see it's a bit more jagged than the regular landscape because it uses less polygons. But I think, you know, this could be a way of getting things on like low-end computers. But the art style, again, I just can't match up. The trees and the farms, they just do not look right for the rest of the game. Again, we got pretty good draw distance here. We're not getting much of that pop-up. I'm quite impressed overall by Gaia. So I thought, why don't I use Gaia and use something else called Vegetation Studio, where Gaia creates the landscape, and what Vegetation Studio can do is use different zones to generate the vegetation, giving me more control over that. And this is that result. As I said, we're using Gaia to create the landscape. We're using this thing called Vegetation Studio to generate vegetation, and what you can actually do is set up different zones of different types of vegetation. I thought I could separate out and have like a forest here and a tropical area here and a desert there, but there's a problem here. I'm on my different monitor at this point, which is running at 120 Hertz, so the frame rate can go up to 120 frames a second. You will see that once again it's tanking, and this is because the amount of vegetation we've got is overwhelming the engine. All that grass, individual little blades, is absolutely wiping it out. Which is a shame because, you know, we like a more densely populated area, but this really isn't doing it. The other thing I did with this one, I went all out and I said, let's have a proper 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer area, which, as you can see, looks pretty big, but there are problems. We're plagued as we get closer with the pop-up problem of bits of level of detail really being noticeable, and you see these trees just sort of popping in as their detail changes. And if we go up a little bit higher, we can just see how bad that looks. We've literally got these trees popping up as their detail model changes. It's just not looking good at all. Now, whilst I was doing all this testing with larger levels and seeing what I could do, I also had a mess around with different types of assets. Whenever there's any sort of sale on, or you can get bits and pieces for free, there's like humble bundles. The Unity asset stores sometimes have stuff for free or for very cheap. I grab hold of stuff because I think, oh, I can't model 3D very well, and I can grab hold of this building or whatever and put it in a game. So I mocked up a couple of levels. Some of these sort of assets had sort of dummy levels, and I just managed to pull these into the sim and basically check it out. And so here are a couple of potential levels we're looking at. Now, if you've ever played the game The Last of Us or The Last of Us 2, this level will look quite familiar. It's a kind of post-apocalyptic, disease has wiped us all out, which feels a little bit close to home at the moment. I kind of quite like the art style of some of these things. It's a very basic test scene that's just been sort of arranged to sort of show the level off from a walking area. It's not, again, when you fly around these things, it looks completely different. And this isn't a level in itself. This is more of these assets could be used in a sort of a wider setting. I kind of like them, but they need to fit in with the rest of it. Again, could we have a zombie area in the rest of the sim where you can fly around the sort of more deserted, literally a bando city rather than a sort of more working city. But anyway, that's that one. Some interesting designs there.
And then we have this one, which is called the Desert Citadel. A bunch of meshes for buildings. They've staged it on this basic landscape, which almost fits directly into one of the sort of desert levels that we've got at the moment. And it's just kind of like adds a bit more variety to stuff, because we've got a few more buildings, a few more gaps to fly through, and just basically things to play with, which I think is quite cool. Lots of really nice meshes to experiment with here. Again, this is very much a stage level. There is stuff that's been placed there which will look fine from the viewpoint, but as you approach it, you're like, oh, this isn't right. This is just a 2D little thing, and these places are just sitting in the air. And that's how a lot of games are constructed. If you could look behind the actual scenes from where they want you to look, you'll find that the detail there is much less. But I do like the fact we've got a palace to mess with, and towers and gaps to fly through and that. So yeah, I could imagine putting some of these assets in there and being able to sort of fly them. Just again, more variety, more fun things to mess about with. And you can see some of the meshes do not have any top details, because no one expected to fly over them. So there's some fixes to do, and there's some different things to do, but I think there's potential there.
So from my point of view, what I can do is hack a level into the game pretty quickly, and that's because I'm missing out some crucial components of it, like the start position and what happens if you're out of bounds, and the reset position and other items throughout the level which just don't exist. And that's pretty easy for me, but I didn't build anything in the sim to make it easy to put levels in. So what I'm actually going to do first, before I do anything else, is this thing I call the Great Refactoring. Basically, when I started creating the sim, I went from a very simple prototype, and as ideas came to me, I sort of bolted them together. And at some point, when you're bolting things together and just sort of hacking bits about, it gets to the size where it becomes a little bit unfeasible to do it anymore, and you have to go back and say, actually, let me have another look and see what I need to do. So what I need to do in this case is think about the core code that runs throughout different levels, and just load in the bits I need to, and have metadata representing different things in levels that I need to sort out. Like there's going to be common things in levels like the quad and the landing mat, and then there's sort of metadata thing like the quad start position, if we've got AI cars, what their tracks are, do we have weather available on this thing, all these sort of things that I can look at and process on a per level basis. As it is, there's far too much code repetition and asset repetition in the sim, so it's already bloatier than I want to. So this should have the effect of making the overall size of the app much smaller, and also have it working more efficient. The other thing I want to be able to do is easily integrate the sort of levels I've talked about. Even if, you know, we're putting in a bit of variety and putting in new buildings and stuff, it's at least something to throw at you. Even though I haven't resolved my ideas about how I get bigger levels in there and what I want to do, I can at least be able to easily throw new levels in there, and like you guys can test it out and tell me if you like it or not. At the moment, it would take me like a week or two to integrate another level in, because of all the stuff I have to do. I'm aiming for it to take me 10 minutes. So I just drop a level in, I repackage it and say, there you go, have a level to play with. So what is the future for the app? So there is a finite limit of what I can do easily in Unity Engine. I can get to about 1 kilometre, and if I put too much vegetation detail in, everything starts chugging a bit. So how did a game like Ghost of Tsushima do it? Well, I should mention that had an estimated budget of about $60 million and had hundreds of people working on it. So I'm not trying to emulate that exactly, because clearly I won't be able to. But the sort of thing it does is it's very clever about how it displays stuff. It doesn't just load everything in because the map is so huge. So what it does is stream in bits of pieces as it needs to, but it's still managing to get a viewpoint. If you're up high, you can see for ages, because it manages the fact that, oh, it thinks, yeah, I can do a simple representation of that faraway image and still make it look very lifelike. And there's absolute seamless stuff about going from far to near. And I thought, how can I do that? And yeah, I could go and write my own system about streaming in stuff. And, you know, I'm already thinking about how it can be done. And I just thought, is there something that lets me do that a little bit easier? Is there something that ties it all in a little bit together? Because I have to say, using those really big levels in Unity, I have managed to crash the editor out several times. And I'm like, that's not very good. Is Unity becoming too limited for this? Which sounds crazy, because there's some really big and impressive games written in Unity, but there's a lot of code behind that, managing other things. So then I decided to think about, should I turn to something else? And the obvious candidate in terms of engines that can really process power is Unreal Engine. And initially I wanted to look at Unreal Engine 5. It's got two new features called nanite rendering and lumen technology. Nanite rendering seems to be a way of, essentially it's kind of like a level of detail stuff where it can seemingly display billions of polygons without hardly any cost to the running system. I thought this would be amazing. Could I get stuff to work even more and go really elaborate on the landscapes without having to really worry about trying to optimize it? Then I find out that Nanite is so far only released on Windows and next-gen consoles, and you have to have so many licenses and NDAs to work on next-gen consoles, and I don't have a Windows PC, so that screwed me a bit. But I started looking at Unreal Engine 4, and although it's a bit of a pain because it's a whole new editor, it's a whole new way of writing stuff, and it's a whole new way of looking at how things are structured, I was quite impressed by the way everything was very tightly meshed together, and it seemed very easy to do things like radical post-processing effects, and it seemed very structured behind getting the very best graphical effects you could for less processing. And I got as far as mocking up a level. What I did, I took one of Epic Games' test levels, which is called Zen Garden, which is actually something you'd use on your phone and you can sort of touch things. And I wrote a very basic quad controller which I used on a joystick, and I just flew it around just to see how it looked, so I could look at the particle effects going and sort of reflections and fish in the water and that sort of thing. And it seemed to run very well. You'll see the screen capture I've got at the moment is directly from the editor window, and it's running at about 90 frames a second. When I'm not doing screen capture, that's happily running at 120 frames a second. And another important thing Unreal Engine has is support for streaming in areas of very large maps, so you don't have to sort of think about how you could write that all for yourself. And the reason this should be much faster than Unity is the same way that you can tell something's running a Unity game. If you go and look in the directory, you'll find something called the Unity player, and this is because C# as a language isn't properly compiled to actual machine code. It's compiled to bytecode. Sometimes we call this tokenized. Compiled to bytecode means it's kind of this generic and slightly lower level language in order to describe what's going on. And what happens is the Unity player interprets that bytecode and squirts out the game at the end of the day. And this means it's really easy to make multi-platform code. You take one piece of code, you say build this for Mac, build this for Windows, build this for Linux, etc, etc, and you squirt it out the other side because you don't need to compile any native stuff. Unreal is completely different in this response. You've got this graphical thing called blueprints, which is quite good for sketching stuff out, and then the heart of the language is C++, and that needs to be compiled. There's downsides here as well. You can't cross-compile because you need a native Windows platform to compile Windows stuff, you need native Mac to compile Mac stuff, so that presents some problems along with other things. But anyway, this is the future. Right now, what I'm going to be doing is refactoring the code on the current sim in order to produce more levels for starters, but at the same time I'm starting to do some stuff on Unreal Engine to see the sort of thing I can produce and the sort of performance level I can get both on high-end and low-end machines to see where I can take this. So that's it for now. No new release yet, but hopefully it'll be coming soon. I'll let you know when it's there. Until that time, you can of course find the game on GitHub and Steam and App Store and Play Store and places like that. In the meantime, catch you next one. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.